Thanks. Thank, thank you very much. So I'm happy to be here. I'm excited. Um, as she said, we're going to cover around best practices in JavaScript. And let's go. All right. So my name is Luis. I studied computer engineering here in Mexico. I'm also a campus expert from GitHub, currently based in Mexico City. And I'm currently working as a technical leader and product manager. You can find me at Twitter and GitHub as Luis E. J. Robles. Feel free to follow me and we can chat. All right. So the agenda for today, what will be why you should care about it, about best practices. All right. The next thing is going to be around tips and currently just best practices. And last but not least, resources about how you can improve uh, how you program today and where do I get all the info for this workshop. All right. So as a note, this is not something best practices. This is not something that I invented myself. If you Google around best practices in Java, in Python, and JavaScript, you will find a lot of information around this topic. The reason that I'm interested in telling you about best practices is because when you're starting to code, it is not common to get interested in this topic. All right. So it is very important, but somehow as you're currently starting, you're not kind of interested in this. All right. So this will be the agenda for today. We're going to have around 35 minutes for the workshop or the talk, and another 10 minutes for Q&A. All right. So if you have any question during the presentation, just feel free to put it in the chat, and later we can get into it. So let's go. So why you should care about best practices using JavaScript or any other programming language? The first one is because it generates like an standardization between software development teams. This means that if you're currently working on some project and a friend of you come to work into your project, it's easier for them to come and work as soon as possible if you have some rules, some standardizations, some ways to do things instead of just making things work like the way we are used to. All right. So it is easier for someone in a company to come and work in your project if you have these rules and best practices and ways to do things. If you standardize this into the most of your projects, then if you have any project has its own rules, right? The second thing is because it encourages good habits. Why is this? As I said, when you're starting, maybe you're just going and coding like 24/7 or whatever time you want, and you're just worried about shipping things, right? Like just programming and then make things work and fixing things and everything. But caring about best practices also makes you a good programmer and gives you like good habits that cares about collaborating, about making things the way it should be, about how you can implement something the good way instead of just making things work, right? Also, lower the security issues. This is because maybe if you standardize how projects work inside your company or the team that you're into it, you're going to have a quicker way to detect issues and bugs and everything. All right. The other thing is because it lowers the performance issues, and we're going to get into it just a few slides after. And this is like the most important things that why you should care about best practices, right? The first best practice that you can find, and I can tell you, is first, before you can start to code, you need to understand what the client or what the project is, or what is the final form of the project. Because if you do not understand the final form of the project, or what it's supposed to look the project in the end, you're going to do it like you're going to build something, and then the client is going to request another change and a fix and a new feature, and you're going to patch over the software, over your code, like one and another time, right? So first, before you start to code, you need to understand what you're going, how the software is going to look in the end, right? How your modules, your services, your components, your structure, your front end, your back end, your database. And if you don't get all of this, you can resume this into think first and then code. This is the essential thing about programming. It is not about how many lines you throw at a project. It is how well you architect the software to be, right? The second is around a principle. Some of you may heard about KISS. It's about try simplifying your solutions, right? It means that, for example, you as when you're programming or you're developing or shipping a feature, the first time you do it, you're going to do it the way you understand it's meant to be done, right? And then maybe a few days later, you come back to that piece of code and you think like, hey, maybe I can refactorize this and make it like a lot simpler and easier to read, right? So KISS is about this. It's about simpler code and less bugs. KISS, it stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid. You can find more about it in Google, right? But this is like some of the essential things about programming. Just make things simpler, readable, and easier for others to code, right? And following about KISS, it's, um, for example, in this one, we have this variable grade that is going to be assigned by some value from the SOFGR function, right? Imagine that SOFGR function returns a number, right? If you look at this, the first one, you don't know what is returning by the name, right? It's just what is SOFGR, right? Instead, if you look the second one, if you look at grade, the second grade, you understand that maybe the function sum of grades return the summary of some values, of some number values, right? So try always to make your variables and your code and function and everything the most readable, right? This is like it is like a good practice. Seems like easy to do, but currently I found like a lot of developers using just like any name for a variable, any name for a function that makes complex to understand how the code is working, right? So always make sure your code is understandable and easy to read by others. The other thing is, do not use new object, new array, new number, new string, new function. Instead, for example, instead of new object, you can initialize or you can assign a variable by using braces, an empty braces or braces with properties and with zero values and everything. In arrays, you can use empty brackets to initialize an array. Instead of new number, you can use numbers just like const number 0 equals to 0. Instead of new string, you can use an empty string to initialize a variable with a string, and new function with the just like the function. All right. Why is this? Because it makes your code shorter, readable, safer, and it's a little bit faster. You can Google around this. Like, it is not common these days to initialize variables and everything that is here in the presentation with new object, new array, new number, new string. Instead, developers use braces, brackets, numbers, empty strings, and functions. All right. So this is like, you should be aware of this, right? The next thing is about making things shorter when it makes sense to you. All right. For example, in this one, we have in the left example of code, we have a variable called age, which equals to 18. And then we have a variable, it's called legal, sorry. And then we have an if else. This if else, if age is more or equal to 21, it's going to assign true. And if it's not, it's going to assign false, right? So this is kind of, it is more complex to read. Instead of the right one, if you see the right one, it is more safer and more easier to read the right one, where we are using, it is the same functionality, all right? The same functionality. The difference is because in the right one, we are using ternary operators. Why is this? We have the age constant, the variable, which equals to 18. Then we have the constant is legal, and it equals to a decision, right? If age is more or equal to 21, if it is like that, it's going to assign true. If it's not, it's going to assign false. Just make sure you use this shortcut notation, or make things easier to read when it makes sense to you, right? You can find a lot of situations when you can apply this to your code, and it will make it easier to read, right? Avoid obvious comments. This is because sometimes you may find a lot of people that can tell you like, hey, you need to comment everything, every line of code that you're writing, right? But the reality is not every line of code that you're writing needs to be commented. Why is this? For example, in this one, we have a variable called legal age that equals 21, right? And there's a comment that it says legal age is the age where we assume we are mature enough to decide by yourself in Mexico, right? This comment is not like useful because by the name of the constant of the variable, you can tell that you're assigning the legal age of something, right? The comment is just like, is not useful there, right? So just keep in mind that you need to comment where it needs to be commented, right? Not all of your code needs to has comments, just the parts that you think people or developers need some help to understand what you're doing, right? And following about commenting, about using double slash when commenting, when you're having comments for more than 2 lines. In this example, as you can see, we have a comment that lasts 3 lines. It will be more complex and more complicated to understand or to read if you have, like, for each line you have double slash. It's going to be very difficult. And if for some reason you delete the double slash in some line, it's going to throw you an error, right? So when using this type of comments with the slash and asterisk, you're ensuring that it's going to throw you an error, but before you run your application, all right? The next one is avoid double equal, all right? Why is this? Some of you may have find that in legacy code you can find double equal, and in another type of code you might find triple equal, right? What is the main difference between the two? The triple equal forces a comparison by type and value, and double equal try converting the operands to match type. In the example that I put there, we have two variables: the variable my age that has 25 as a number, and then my age string that has 25 but as a string, right? If we compare my age with double equal with my age string, it's going to return true. Why is this? Because it's going to match the types, right? It's going to convert. But if you compare my age with triple equal and my age string, it's going to turn about false. Why is this? Because they are not the same type. One is number, one is string. Currently, I have like 3 years of experience. It's not common to see double equal. Just make sure you use triple equal when you're comparing some variables. But it's good for you that you know that there is triple equal and then it's double equal, all right? Just make sure you have this knowledge around your head. The next one is about another principle as keys. It's called dry. What is dry? Dry is don't repeat yourself. For example, in this one, we have a function called add students that imagine that it push an array of students to a database. Then we have a function called remove students that removes an array of students from a database, and update students that receives students, and updates an array of students from a database, right? You can see here that in every function, we have the same validation around the length of the students, right? If students length equals to 0, then you're going to throw an error about empty array because the array is empty, right? This is not good because you're repeating the same validation for every function. How we can solve this? We can do this. We can have a function called error manager, all right, that receives an array, and inside that function, we can parse any array we have. In this example, we just have just one validation, that is, if the array is equal to 0, if the array length is equal to 0, then we're going to throw the array. And then we can call this function inside every function that we previously had. If you see the difference between the two, this is the right way of doing it. Comparing to this, it is easier to understand what is happening in this one, all right? So make sure you don't repeat the functionality that you're writing in your code, right? More than once, right? Usually, you can find this type of errors or improvements once you implemented the feature, once you end to code, right? When you finish the feature, when you already deployed the feature and everything, you may find, if you analyze your code after you finish the feature, you may find some things that you can optimize, that you can reuse, that you can just split it and use it like in a better way, right? So you don't expect to find all of these optimizations in the meantime that you're coding like the feature, all right? The next one is about switches. What about switches? In this one, we have an array of food, an array of objects around foods. The properties of the arrays of the objects, they have a name and a type, right? For example, the scrambled eggs has a type of breakfast. The cereal has a type of breakfast also, and lasagna has a type of dinner, right? But if you see pizza, it doesn't have a type, all right? In this case, if we are going to pass the food array to type of food, you may find that when the type of food is going looping through pizza, it is not going to deploy or to show anything. Why is this? Because pizza doesn't have a type, and because of you don't have a default case, right? Always remember when you use switches to add a default case. Why is this? Because when you add a default case, if some validation doesn't happen, then it's going to go and be inside of default, right? If we pass the food array into type of food, we're going to display, when it's going to be pizza, we're going to display unknown dish, maybe it's a snack, right? So always remember to use a default case every time you use a switch, right? And the next one, it's going to be around variables inside loops. How about this? Avoid declaring variables inside loops. In this example, it is something, to be honest, that I found myself doing like a weeks before. In this example, we are looping through an array of students via a map, all right? And for each student, that it's called single student, we are getting some grades from a database. I don't know, some general grades. Imagine grading, the grading functions is going to get all of the grades for every student in a classroom, right? And if you do this, then you're calling an async procedure inside a map, all right? But if you think about it, you might do this outside the mapping, right? Because gradings may be a general grading for all of the students. Instead of doing this, we can do this. First, we can get all of the gradings from students into the math grading variable, and then we can loop through students, and then inside for single student, then we can like filter the node, or we can do some calculations, and that can reduce the time that your procedure or your operation can last, all right? So you always need to make sure to get all of the async operations outside some looping if you can, all right? It is not applicable when you are getting values for each student. Like if the await gradings can be for every student, then you need to get all of the gradings for each student inside the map, right? But if you can get the gradings outside of the mapping, that will be great, right? The next one is always use braces, right? In JavaScript, it is common to use braces, and it is not particularly common to not use braces because in the left example, we have a validation about the length of the food. Imagine food is an array, right? And if food length it's more than 0, then we're going to assign any food equals to true, all right? And then we're going to loop through the foods and do some calculations inside of the map. All right, and in the right one, okay, we have kind of the same functionality, but you might think that the left one, it is the same that the right one, and it's not. Why is this? Because if you don't put braces with ifs, it's going to get just the next line. All right, it's going to get, if you don't put braces before the if, after the if, sorry, it's going to take just the next line, right? Not the food.map, all right? So it is not the same. Just always make sure that you know this. Like if you are not going to put braces after an if, just be aware that it's going to take the next line and not all of the code that you put like with the indentation, all right? So in this case, the left example is just going to, if the condition applies to it, if food.length is more than 0, it's going to assign true to any food, right? And in the right one, if the length of the food is more than 0, it's going to perform all of the operations that is shown there, all right? So it's not the same. You just need to be aware of this because I found a lot of errors because of this. Just keep in mind this, all right? The next one, it's about using, when you're just, I remember when I was coding and started coding using Bootstrap and material design and all of the good stuff. And if you're importing these libraries in pure HTML and CSS, back then I didn't know the difference between putting these imports in the head or at the end of the file, all right? If you're putting the imports in the head, just make sure to use the async or differ words. Two, the async or differ is going to, what is going to do? It is going to run your document, all right? And it is going to load your library or whatever code you have in your script asynchronously. It is not going to wait for the script to load just to finish loading the body and everything inside an HTML. All right. Just be aware that you can, or it is better if you put async if you're going to declare all of your scripts inside your head. If not, you can put all of your scripts in the bottom of your file and will be all right. Okay. And the next one, it's about minifying in production. What about this? If you have used, I don't know, Bootstrap or Material Design or Whitetail CSS, I don't know, you might find that if you download the source code or the files to your computer with npm or I don't know, or yard, you might find that they have a bootstrap.css and another one that is bootstrap.min.css, right? When you're coding, when you're just developing the application, it is best for you to use the bootstrap.css, right? Why is this? Because it is more readable than the .min.css. What about it? Why is this? Because the bootstrap.min.css, it is focused on just deploying your application, your platform, all right? Because if you open the .min.css, you're going to find all of the same exact styles and components and everything, just like without spaces, without breaks, without a lot of stuff, that it is not readable by humans, right? So it is meant to be something when you use deploy production, it is better that you use the min file, right? That if you're coding, if you're still coding your platform, your solution, you can use that CSS. But if you are going to just deploy to production, you remember to use that .min .css file, right? And here are some of URLs that you can find to minify your CSS or your files. You can put minifier.org, and you can copy and paste all of your scripts, all of your styles, and you can just receive all of your code minified, right? Also, there is another one, uglify.js/online, where you can put just copy and paste all of your code, and it's going to minify all of your code, right? Also, there are plenty of VS Code. If you use VS Code, there are plenty of plugins to do this. It is not common to just use the URLs. You can use the plugins, and it will work excellent, all right? And what about it? Why there is a semicolon? Because you just need to remember always use a semicolon, all right? What about it? It is a very bad practice that can potentially lead to much bigger, harder, and complex to find issues. If you, maybe in this example, you may not find the difference between the left one and the right one, but because this is an easy example, all right? But imagine if we have like a file with 2,000 lines, it is more complex to understand or to read or to find books than in this one, okay? So always remember to use semicolon whenever you're declaring a variable, finishing a function, I don't know, just always remember to use semicolon. This is a practice that some of us do because some of us are familiar with Python, and in Python you don't need to put braces, just with indentation. But in JavaScript, it is like essential to put semicolon, all right? And the resources, all right, that we're going to get. Resources, it is from where I get all the information. As I said in the beginning, it is not something that I invented myself. If you Google like best practices for JavaScript, for Python, for I don't know, DevOps, backend, frontend, you might find a lot of information about it. It is not something that I just woke up one day and just, hey, I'm going to write about best practices. You can find a lot of information. I encourage you to Google a lot more about it. It is not like when you're studying, as I said, it is not common that you put a lot of effort into it, but in the end, or 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, you're going to realize that it makes your code and you as a professional a more talented one, right? It's going to give you a lot of more opportunities, because being a good programmer or a good software engineer is not about how many lines of codes you're throwing into an application. It is about how well your applications are made, right? About the best practices, collaboration, about how well your application is structured, how you split a client's need into an application. It is about it. Just remember this. Being a good programmer or a good software engineer is not about throwing or knowing everything. It is about best practices, about good habits, about collaboration, and you will be fine. All right. So the next thing, it is a list of resources that you can find a lot of information. I tend to use a lot CSS tricks if you're doing front end. Scotch.io, it is a web page, sorry, to you may find tips for Angular, for React, for Vue, and dev.to. It is a platform that some of you may know. It is like Medium but for developers, where you might find a lot of information about I don't know, technology, community, and everything. All right. So the next one, well, that's it. That's me. That's my Cato Michu. We are happy to share with you all of these tips. We're happy also that you stayed around this talk. As I said, I'm a GitHub campus expert from Mexico. I'm also a technical leader and a product manager currently working on some building platform. Yeah. And that's all.
Awesome.
Do you have any question?
Yeah, it looks like we have one question in the chat if you wanted to address that one.
All right. Okay, will it be equivalent to just do context legal? Will be, oh, sorry. Let me check the comment section. Oh yeah, I find it. Context legal age. The thing here is, for example, Garrett, is I am taking a decision based on the value of age, right? You cannot like just do that. If you search around ternary operators, you're going to find that it is a common practice to just do in a single line the condition, yeah, and the question and the first value, and then if not, then the other. So it is not the same.
Good to know. Is there any other questions from the crowd as we are wrapping up here?
Can I stop sharing the screen? Or?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, you can stop.
Okay.
Yeah, one question that sometimes we have is, what of those best practices that you shared would you wish you would have known at the start of your career?
I think the most important is to think first, to just analyze what you're going to do, to structure everything. Maybe when you're starting, you don't have all of the knowledge to separate everything, just to know the back end, the front end, the database and everything. But with the practice, it is good that you structure everything before you start coding. I remember when I was starting, for example, a client told me like, hey, I need a to-do list, all right? And 3 minutes later, I was just coding, and that is not okay. You need to first think what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, how it's going to interact with the client or the user, and then after that, you can start programming.
Perfect. Was there any other questions that we had? Otherwise, you can give a few minutes of time refund as well. All right, well, that was very helpful and insightful. Lots of great best practices for JavaScript, but also just in general. I think is a really great way to look at it. Thank you again, and we appreciate you being here.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Leah.